Welcome back to What's on Watches. It's a beautiful sunny day here today, and today we're talking about one of the most iconic Rolexes ever, the Rolex Datejust.
The Datejust history starts in 1945 with the Rolex Datejust 4467 with the Jubilee bracelet. This 5-piece bracelet became a staple of Rolex from then and throughout.
The very first 4467 was actually only available in 18 karat gold, and it clocked in, very similar to the one we have here today, at 36mm. And they released it to celebrate the brand's 40th anniversary. The watch they presented was the very first self-winding, automatic, water-resistant watch with a date window. Because of the depth of this movement, due to the added date complication, the watch was incredibly deep, and it had a very similar case structure to the Rolex bubble back, of course, to house that movement.
The Datejust line remained largely unchanged for the next 9 years. In 1954, the first Cyclops was added to the dates, magnifying the date window by 2.5 times. This made the date window more legible, and this trend carried on throughout other watches as well. So for example, we see it on the GMT Master 2 that Tom's wearing here.
Yeah, this GMT Master 2 is available at the What's on Watches online
Link
store.
down below.
Absolutely, bit of a plug there. But yeah, the Cyclops lens is very, very iconic with Rolex. It's been used on the GMT Master, of course it's been used on the Submariner.
Yeah, famously.
It's been used on watches that we quite like as well, such as the Oyster Precision Dates.
Yeah.
All of them coming to the store very soon as well. In 1955, after they introduced the Cyclops lens, Rolex then also offered another variation of the Datejust, and they introduced the Turnograph. So the Turnograph has a rotating bezel, which is something quite unique to the Datejust collection.
With numerals on there as well, isn't it?
Yes, but actually the Turnograph was given to US Air Force pilots in 1955 as actually a reward from coming home from combat. So it got the very iconic nickname, which was?
The Rolex Thunderbird.
Good answer.
So these older models of Datejust, they're not as slim as the ones we see now. When did those fat bubble back case backs start getting slimmed down?
So it was actually in 1957 that Rolex offered quite a new technical change to it. It was a technical change, but it was more aesthetical as well.
Yeah.
They really slimmed down the case
I'd like
profile.
to slip under a cuff a bit better.
Absolutely, yeah. They launched it with the Calibre 1065, which was much, much slimmer. But also in the 1950s, Rolex introduced the Lady Datejust, which is a hugely...
Oh, it's very popular now.
Very
still to this
popular,
day.
one of the best-selling Rolexes of all time.
Yeah.
Very, very similar to the Gents Datejust. The only major difference is, of course, the case size. We've seen them in a variation of case size over the year. 29mm. At the moment, I think the most popular one's about 31mm as well.
I'd agree.
But yeah, I think really slimming down that case profile was really important. It made the Datejust so much more wearable.
Yeah.
Which of course is a huge part as to why the watch is so popular today.
Of course, Jimmy will need a Rolex, I suppose.
So throughout the 60s and 70s, Rolex continued to update their models.
As always with Rolex, there was continual change to the Datejust.
Design innovation.
Absolutely. In the 60s and 70s, we saw the introduction of the 1570 movement, but the main talking point from the 70s is, of course, the 3035 caliber. This caliber came around in 1977 and was sported in the hugely collectible 16014 Datejust. With the introduction of the 3035, Rolex were able to offer something that is a bit of a saving grace for all modern watches, a quick set feature to the date. The watch is also much more accurate. Rolex upped the frequency of this movement from around 20,000. They upped it to 28,000. Of course, upping the frequency is naturally going to give you higher precision. On the topic of precision, in the 70s, which is a little bit of a controversial topic, Rolex actually made quartz watches. So for all them people that say Rolex isn't real because it ticks, sometimes you might be right, but sometimes you might be wrong.
I don't think you get any Oyster quartzes from your holiday on Turkey, though.
Yeah, if you're getting approached with an Oyster quartz on the beach, it's probably not real. But yeah, the first Oyster quartz in the Datejust collection was the 17000. We also saw some other quartz models in that era. We obviously touched on this the other day as well. We also saw the Oyster quartz day date during this time as well.
Nice watch.
Really nice watch, but in my opinion, the 16014, the quick set feature, the updated frequency, if you are going to buy a vintage Datejust, I think realistically it is the one that I would choose if I was to buy an old 36mm Datejust.
In the 1980s, Rolex introduced the Calibre 3135 to the Datejust line. This allowed the Datejust watches to become a little bit slimmer, but Rolex also refined the watches further. They added sapphire crystal instead of the plexiglass. The plexiglass being an acrylic crystal, so basically a plastic, and it scratches pretty easily, to be honest, but that is also part and parcel of some of the vintage models. So it's pros and cons of what you like, but many watches still to this day will use a sapphire crystal. And this just goes to show how refined and well ahead of the game Rolex were, even in the 1980s, using these modern materials that we still use now. Just shows that they're one step ahead.
Introducing the 3135 caliber was fantastic for Rolex, because they actually, I think as you mentioned, ran with that movement, well, until recently, really. The 3135 was, of course, using the Datejust. It was using other date models as well, such as the Submariner. Of course, it required minor updates over the years, but using that base 3135 movement was so iconic for Rolex, and pretty much every date Rolex from the 80s until even the other year with the upgrade to the Submariner, when they upgraded it to the 3235, it was still using that 3135 movement then, and I think that just shows the build quality of Rolex, but it also shows how they offer refinement to really iconic designs. So in the late noughties, around 2009, Rolex, about 65 years after the release of the Datejust, decided to give it a facelift, if you want to call it that.
It didn't pay off, in my opinion.
No, wrong decision. So they introduced the Datejust 2. We saw the Datejust 2 mainly with Oyster bracelets. And we also saw it with increased luminescence. The Datejust 2 came and went. The Datejust 2 was sort of upgraded with the Datejust 41, which we see from Rolex these days.
But I think they lost a bit of the Datejust DNA when they did that.
It's too big.
A
Datejust should not be bigger than 36mm. This is a perfect example of the watch we have here.
Literally,
This looks just as good today as the originals did in 1945.
And it will look just as good in 2045 as well.
People, we always bang on about 34mm and 36mm. I genuinely believe no Rolex should be bigger than 40mm.
Preach.
I think if you want a 40mm Rolex, buy a sports watch, buy a GMT, buy a sub, buy something with true sports DNA. But the 36mm one we have here, it has the Oyster case, so it has a slim pedigree of sportiness, but this is refined, this is elegant, and the 36mm Datejust, as we always bang on about, smaller is better, the perfect Rolex Datejust.
So the Rolex Datejust continues to be one of the most popular and sought after Rolex models still to this day. The reference we have here is the 116234.
Well done.
I struggle to remember numbers. I really like this watch. Simply because that white dial just pops off your skin, especially in summer if you're a little bit tanned. The white dial offers some really nice contrast, and I really love the way the Roman numerals play in the light. The fact it's got a white gold bezel too just shows a little bit of contrast between the steel case. That it's not instantly noticeable, it's quite subtle, and I like that. But every now and again you will catch it and you will realise there's something a little bit different.
The 116234, particularly with this white dial we've got here, is often quite a talked about variation of the Datejust. With modern Datejusts, we've seen so many variations, both for ladies and gents. Like we've seen it with Oyster bracelets, we've seen it with Jubilee bracelets, we've even seen some precious metal ones on leather straps. Touching on the topic of precious metals, steel, gold, two-tone, there's so many options, and that's not even coming onto the dial. I love this white dial option. Another one I really love is the blue dial with the Roman numerals, but it's been available with a black dial, it's been available with a grey dial. There's so many variations to the Datejust line, but I think this 116234 that we have here, literally a one-watch collection, which is something we touch on all the time. We always talk about vintage Rolex as being a one-watch collection, but I think that is just Rolex in a nutshell. If once you have one, you don't really need another watch.
For sure.
But this one would look just as good with some of the fancy attire that you and I are wearing today.
No, it's not fancy.
It's sat in this beautiful summer's garden, as it would with, dare I say it, even a tuxedo.
Yeah, for sure,
White tux, white shirt.
No one really cares about the
But, I mean, when was the last time you saw anybody in black tie? I mean, if James Bond can wear a diver's watch with a tux, you can wear a beautifully refined 36mm Datejust with a white gold bezel.
This Rolex Datejust 116234 is available in the Watson Watches online store.
And if you want a 36mm Datejust similar to this, or maybe one with a little bit more vintage pedigree, get in touch. We'd be more than happy to help. But make sure you check out watsonwatches.co.uk to find your next vintage Rolex watch. So as always, thank you very much for watching. And if you've enjoyed today's video, please make sure that you like and subscribe. We'll see you soon.